For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. An SLA of 99.9% availability allows for a maximum of 10 minutes of downtime per week. The correct answer is true. SLAs only apply to commercial services like Azure. The correct answer is false. 100% availability is achievable and common for Azure services. The correct answer is false. A lower SLA percentage means a service will be less available and potentially more affordable. The correct answer is true. Let's now take a moment to explain each of these answers clearly. Starting with the first statement, a 99.9% SLA indeed allows for up to 10 minutes of downtime per week. This is because 99.9% availability translates to about 43 minutes of downtime in a month, or roughly 10 minutes per week. That's why such an SLA is considered high availability. Next, the idea that SLAs only apply to commercial services like Azure is incorrect. SLAs, or service level agreements, can exist within organizations too. For instance, an internal IT department may promise a certain level of uptime or response time to another department. Therefore, SLAs are not limited to external or commercial services. Moving on, while 100% availability sounds ideal, it's actually very rare and expensive to achieve. Even top-tier cloud providers like Azure typically offer SLAs like 99%, 99.9%, or 99.95%. Building a system with true 100% uptime requires extreme redundancy, which most services don't implement due to cost. Finally, a lower SLA percentage simply means the service is allowed more downtime. This is often acceptable for non-critical systems like internal dashboards or development environments, and it can be more cost-effective. For example, a backup service used once a month might not need the same uptime guarantee as a live e-commerce website. And that wraps it up. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. A reliable cloud environment helps minimize downtime and service disruptions. The correct answer is true. Predictability in the cloud refers only to cost management and does not include performance. The correct answer is false. Organizations can design their cloud solutions to automatically fail over to another region in case of a failure. The correct answer is true. Performance predictability in cloud computing eliminates the need for autoscaling. The correct answer is false. Now let's go ahead and explain these answers in detail. First, a reliable cloud environment does indeed help reduce downtime and service disruptions. For example, cloud providers like Microsoft Azure design their infrastructure to ensure services stay available even when individual components fail, often using redundancy and failover systems to keep things running. Next, the idea that cloud predictability only refers to cost is incorrect. Predictability in cloud computing spans both cost and performance. This means knowing how much a service will cost, as well as how consistently it performs under different loads. Businesses rely on this predictability to plan budgets and deliver smooth user experiences. Moving on to the third statement, it is true that organizations can architect their solutions to automatically fail over to another region. For instance, if an Azure data center in West Europe goes down, systems can be designed to switch over to a backup in North Europe, ensuring continuous service with minimal interruption. Lastly, performance predictability does not eliminate the need for autoscaling. In fact, autoscaling is part of how cloud platforms achieve predictable performance. When demand spikes, autoscaling automatically adds more resources to maintain performance levels, and when demand drops, it scales back to save costs. So that's the full breakdown. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. IaaS provides the highest level of control over cloud resources compared to other cloud service models. The correct answer is true. In an IaaS model, the cloud provider is responsible for managing the operating system and software applications. The correct answer is false. IaaS allows organizations to rent physical infrastructure in the cloud while managing software configurations. The correct answer is true. IaaS requires organizations to maintain network security configurations. The correct answer is true. Now let's take a moment to explain these answers clearly. First, it is true that IaaS, or infrastructure as a service, gives users the highest level of control compared to PaaS or SaaS. With IaaS, users manage the operating system, storage, and networking components, offering maximum flexibility for custom setups. Next, the second statement is false because in an IaaS model, while the cloud provider takes care of the physical hardware and virtualization, the customer is responsible for the operating system, middleware, and applications. So you have to install and maintain what runs on top of the infrastructure. Moving on, the third statement is true. IaaS lets organizations rent cloud infrastructure like virtual machines and storage, and they can configure and manage software on top of that infrastructure as needed. This is useful for scenarios like hosting custom applications or running legacy software. Finally, the last statement is also true. In IaaS environments, the responsibility for network security settings, such as firewall rules, access controls, and encryption, falls on the user. This means organizations must be proactive in securing their infrastructure. That's a full breakdown of the IaaS-related questions. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct option from the drop-down menus. Deploying and configuring cloud-based resources quickly as business requirements change is called agility. Now let's explain what this means and why agility is the right answer. Agility in cloud computing refers to the ability to respond quickly to changing business needs. When an organization needs to launch a new service, scale up resources, or shift to a new environment, agility means they can do it quickly without the delays of traditional IT setups. For example, if a marketing team wants to launch a campaign site overnight, cloud agility allows the IT team to spin up the infrastructure in minutes. In contrast, scalability is about handling growing workloads. So if your customer base doubles, your app can scale up to maintain performance. Elasticity takes it a step further by automatically adjusting resources based on demand, like scaling out during peak hours and scaling in during quiet periods. And high availability ensures your app remains online even if part of the system fails. So in this case, since we're talking about quick deployment and configuration as needs change, agility is the best fit. For each compliance feature listed below, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its description in the option column. Help standardize resource configurations for compliance. Templates. Provides insights into resource health and potential breaches. Auditing. Ensures resources align with regulatory requirements. Templates. Flags non-compliant resources and suggests fixes. Auditing. Let's now go ahead and break down the reasoning behind each match. To begin with, templates are used to help standardize resource configurations for compliance. Think of them as blueprints that allow organizations to consistently deploy resources that meet specific policies and settings, reducing the chance of accidental misconfigurations. Next, auditing provides insights into resource health and potential breaches. Auditing tools monitor cloud resources and log events, so administrators can detect suspicious activity or compliance violations. For example, if someone accesses a resource outside of business hours, that gets flagged for review. Moving forward, ensuring resources align with regulatory requirements also falls under templates. These templates can be pre-built to comply with regulations like GDPR or HIPAA. So when you use them, you're automatically staying within legal and industry standards. Lastly, auditing is what flags non-compliant resources and offers suggestions for resolution. These tools identify where the system isn't meeting required settings and give administrators actionable steps to fix those issues. This makes it easier to stay ahead of compliance problems before they become serious. That wraps up the explanation. Templates help you stay aligned from the start, and auditing keeps everything in check as you go. Implementing Azure Multi-Factor Authentication, MFA, ensures that the identity of a user is verified as who they claim to be. This is an example of the correct answer is B, authentication. Let's go ahead and explain why that's the right choice. Authentication is all about confirming a user's identity. So when you use MFA, you're asking the user to prove who they are using 2 or more verification factors, like a password plus a phone notification or fingerprint. That's why MFA is a clear example of authentication in action. Now let's quickly look at why the other options are incorrect. Authorization comes after authentication. It's what determines what you can access once your identity has been confirmed. For instance, even after logging in successfully, a user might only have permission to view certain files, not edit or delete them. Integrity focuses on ensuring data is accurate and untampered. It doesn't deal with who is accessing it, but whether the data remains unchanged from its original state. Confidentiality, on the other hand, is about keeping information private and protected from unauthorized access. While related to security, it's not about verifying identity. So to sum up, when it comes to verifying who someone is, authentication is the correct and complete answer. A company is using a platform as a service PaaS solution to host its application. Which of the following are responsibilities that the company must manage under the shared responsibility model? Select two answers. The correct answers are A, ensuring the security of the stored data, C, controlling user access and identities. Now let's break this down clearly so you understand why. When using PaaS, the cloud provider takes care of much of the infrastructure, like servers, storage, networking, and the operating system. However, the company still has important responsibilities at the application and data level. First, securing the stored data remains the company's responsibility. That includes making sure sensitive information is encrypted, managing who has access, and ensuring no unauthorized users can view or manipulate the data. For example, if your app stores customer payment details, it's on you to keep that data safe. Next, controlling user access and identities is also the company's duty. That means setting up secure authentication and authorization policies, like using multi-factor authentication or role-based access control to ensure the right people can access the right parts of the application. On the other hand, managing the underlying network infrastructure and patching the operating system are handled by the cloud provider in a PaaS model. So the company doesn't need to worry about physical servers, switches, or keeping the OS up to date. That's how responsibilities are shared in a PaaS setup. You focus on your app and data, and the provider takes care of the platform it runs on. Which of the following describe the management in the cloud options available for cloud resources? Select two answers. The correct answers are A, using a web portal for management, C, managing cloud environments through a command line interface. Now let's go ahead and explain why these are the correct options. Using a web portal for management is a very common method in cloud environments. Think of Azure Portal or AWS Management Console. These graphical interfaces let users deploy, monitor, and manage cloud services without needing to worry about the physical infrastructure. The provider handles that part. The user just clicks and configures through the portal. Next, managing cloud environments through a command line interface is another valid option. This is especially useful for advanced users who want to automate tasks, write scripts, or control multiple resources efficiently. For instance, using Azure CLI or PowerShell, admins can scale services, assign roles, or create virtual machines with a few lines of code. Now let's briefly look at the incorrect choices. Deploying virtual machines directly without templates is technically possible, but not recommended. It doesn't make use of best practices like using templates or automation tools, which are essential for consistency and scalability in cloud management. Automatically receiving software patches with no user intervention refers to management of the cloud, which is the provider's responsibility, not an example of what the user manages in the cloud. So to wrap it up, web portals and command line tools are both key tools for managing resources in the cloud. Why might a company choose IaaS for testing and development environments? Select two answers. The correct answers are IaaS allows rapid creation and replication of development environments. IaaS provides full control over the environment and enabling precise configuration for testing purposes. Now let's go ahead and explain why these two statements are correct. IaaS allows rapid creation and replication of development environments because it lets users quickly spin up virtual machines or duplicate existing setups with minimal effort. This is especially useful during testing, where developers often need to reset environments or run multiple configurations without delay. For instance, a development team can easily clone an environment to test a new feature without affecting the original. IaaS provides full control over the environment, enabling precise configuration for testing purposes. This means developers can decide the exact operating system, storage configuration, and network settings they need. Such control is vital for testing apps under specific conditions, like simulating a production setup or isolating issues tied to a particular version of software. Now, let's look at the incorrect statements. The idea that IaaS requires the cloud provider to manage the operating system and updates is false. In fact, the customer is responsible for managing the OS, middleware, and applications. This level of responsibility is what gives users flexibility, but also requires more involvement. The statement that IaaS is the most cost-effective solution for running fully managed business applications is also inaccurate. Fully managed solutions are better suited to software as a service, SaaS, where the provider handles almost everything, reducing both cost and complexity for the customer. So, in summary, companies choose IaaS for testing and development because it gives them speed and control, two things critical for building and refining applications efficiently. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Azure VMs can be used for testing and development environments. True. Organizations can use Azure VMs for disaster recovery by spinning up temporary instances. True, virtual machines cannot be used to run business applications in the cloud. False. A lift and shift migration allows physical servers to be replicated as Azure VMs with minimal changes. True. Let's now explain each of these statements clearly. Azure VMs can be used for testing and development environments because they offer a fast, flexible way to create and tear down environments without needing physical hardware. For instance, a team can set up multiple test configurations simultaneously to validate app behavior before release. Organizations can use Azure VMs for disaster recovery by spinning up temporary instances. This is a practical way to ensure business continuity. During an outage, businesses can shift their critical services to Azure VMs until their primary systems are restored, then shut them down to save cost. The idea that virtual machines cannot be used to run business applications in the cloud is incorrect. In fact, Azure VMs are widely used for exactly that. They support a variety of workloads, from websites and databases to ERP systems, and they offer the scalability and performance needed for production use. Finally, a lift and shift migration allows physical servers to be replicated as Azure VMs with minimal changes. This approach helps businesses quickly move to the cloud without having to re-architect their applications. It's a common first step in cloud adoption because it reduces complexity and cost. So, overall, Azure VMs are a versatile solution that support development, recovery, and business operations with ease. For each Azure Blob storage concept, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its description in the option column. Stores unstructured data as objects in a cloud storage account, Blob storage. A storage container that holds one or more Blob objects. Blob container. A type of Blob storage optimized for streaming and sequential write operations. Append Blob. The largest type of Blob used to store virtual hard drive VHD files for virtual machines. Page Blob. The default and most common type of Blob storage suitable for general purpose use. Block Blob. Let's now explain the reasoning behind each correct match. Blob storage stores unstructured data like documents, images, and backups in the cloud. It's an overall service that supports storing all kinds of blobs, block, append, and page, and is ideal for scalable object storage. Blob container is simply a logical grouping within a storage account that holds blob objects. Think of it like a folder that organizes different blobs, making them easier to manage and access. Append Blob is optimized for scenarios where data is continuously added, such as logging. Instead of overwriting data, it lets you append new entries, making it perfect for audit trails or real-time data collection. Page blob is designed for random read and write operations, which is exactly what virtual hard disks, VHDs, require. So it's commonly used for virtual machines in Azure where high performance and flexibility are essential. Block blob is the default blob type and is ideal for storing text and binary data. It's commonly used for files like images, videos, or documents, and is optimized for uploading large amounts of data efficiently. Lastly, both file share and queue storage were not used because they serve different functions. File share is for SMB file access, and queue storage is for messaging between components, not blob storage. That's how each concept fits into Azure Blob Storage. For each Azure File Storage concept, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its description in the option column. A fully managed cloud-based file server solution that supports SMB and NFS protocols. Azure Files allows synchronization of Azure Files with on-premises file servers. Azure File Sync, the protocol used for file shares in Windows environments. SMB, a migration strategy where an entire infrastructure is moved to Azure. Lift and Shift, used to back up Azure file shares with near infinite storage capacity. Azure Backup. Let's now explain each correct match to reinforce your understanding. Azure Files is a cloud-native file storage solution that supports the SMB and NFS protocols, allowing you to mount shared folders in the cloud the same way you would with on-premises file servers. It's ideal for lift and shift scenarios or hybrid environments. Azure File Sync is what makes hybrid file setups work. It allows on-premises Windows servers to synchronize with Azure Files, enabling centralization in the cloud while keeping frequently accessed files local via caching. SMB is the protocol used in Windows environments to access shared folders. Azure Files supports SMB, which is what allows Windows clients to access cloud-based shares as if they were local network drives. Lift and Shift is a common cloud migration strategy where an entire on-premises environment is replicated in Azure with minimal changes. When moving file services, this approach helps maintain existing setups while transitioning to cloud infrastructure. Azure Backup provides long-term backup and recovery solutions for Azure Files, giving organizations near infinite cloud storage and automated data protection. Now for the unused items. Blob storage is used for object storage, not file sharing, so it doesn't apply here. Local disk backup isn't an Azure native solution and usually requires manual effort and on-site storage. That's how each Azure file storage concept fits into real-world cloud architecture. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Azure Data Box is used for large-scale offline data transfers, while Azure Migrate helps organizations plan and implement cloud migrations. Now let's break this down for clarity. Azure Data Box is a physical storage device provided by Microsoft that allows organizations to transfer large volumes of data to Azure without relying on internet bandwidth. This is especially useful when transferring data over the network would take too long or be too costly. Instead, you load the data onto the data box, ship it to Microsoft, and they upload it directly into your Azure storage account. Azure Migrate, on the other hand, is a cloud migration tool. It's not just about moving data. It helps organizations assess their current environment, analyze dependencies between applications, and plan the migration of virtual machines, databases, and workloads into Azure. It includes tools that guide you through each step from discovery to execution. Now, just to clarify some incorrect ideas, Azure Site Recovery is for disaster recovery, not migration. Also, Databox is not a network-based transfer method, it's offline. And although both tools involve data, neither one serves as a general backup strategy. So in summary, use Azure Databox for bulk offline transfers and Azure Migrate when you want a full strategy for cloud migration. For each VM feature listed below the table, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its description in the option column. Provides load balancing, virtual machine scale sets. Protects against power failures, virtual machine availability sets. Allows scaling in response to demand, virtual machine scale sets. Staggers updates across VMs. Virtual machine availability sets supports multi-session environments, virtual machine scale sets. Let's now walk through each explanation so you understand the matchups clearly. Provides load balancing is best handled by virtual machine scale sets, which can automatically distribute traffic across multiple VM instances using a load balancer. This ensures optimal performance and efficient use of resources, especially during high-demand periods. Protects against power failures is a feature of virtual machine availability sets. They spread VMs across fault domains, so if one physical server goes down due to a power issue, the other VMs continue running on unaffected hardware, maintaining uptime. Allows scaling in response to demand is another strength of virtual machine scale sets. They let you automatically increase or decrease the number of VMs based on workload, making it easier to adapt to changing performance needs without manual intervention. Staggers updates across VMs is the responsibility of virtual machine availability sets. They use update domains to ensure that not all VMs are updated at the same time. This reduces the risk of downtime during maintenance activities. Supports multi-session environments is managed by virtual machine scale sets as well. This setup enables multiple users to access and work within the same VM infrastructure, which is ideal for environments like remote desktops or shared applications. So, in short, scale sets are built for automation and scalability, while availability sets focus on resilience and controlled updates. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. ExpressRoute supports Cloud Exchange colocation, point-to-point Ethernet, any-to-any networks, and direct ExpressRoute connections. True. ExpressRoute is limited to a single type of connectivity model. False. ExpressRoute Direct allows businesses to connect directly to Microsoft's global network at peering locations. True. ExpressRoute any-to-any connectivity allows businesses to integrate their existing wide area network WAN with Azure. Let's go ahead and break down the reasons behind each of these answers. ExpressRoute supports Cloud Exchange colocation, point-to-point Ethernet, any-to-any networks, and direct ExpressRoute connections. This means that businesses can choose from a variety of connectivity models to match their infrastructure needs. For example, a company with global offices might use any-to-any for WAN integration, while another might use direct for high-performance access. The claim that ExpressRoute is limited to a single type of connectivity model is false. In reality, ExpressRoute is quite flexible. It supports multiple models, allowing organizations to choose what best suits their use case, whether it's for scalability, speed, or specific integration requirements. Now, ExpressRoute Direct allows businesses to connect directly to Microsoft's global backbone network at peering locations. This is especially useful for high bandwidth needs like running heavy analytics or supporting enterprise workloads that require ultra-low latency and high availability. Finally, ExpressRoute any-to-any connectivity allows integration with an organization's existing wide area network. This means branch offices can seamlessly connect to Azure without re-architecting their entire network, making hybrid cloud deployments much more practical. So in summary, ExpressRoute offers flexibility, speed, and scalable connectivity options to suit a range of enterprise needs. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Multi-factor authentication MFA requires at least 2 forms of verification before granting access. True. MFA can use factors such as something you know, something you have, or something you are. True. MFA is not needed if a strong password policy is enforced. False. Microsoft Entra MFA provides multiple verification options, including phone calls and mobile app notifications. True. Let's now explain why these answers are correct. Multi-factor authentication requires at least 2 forms of verification to confirm a user's identity. This could be a password combined with a one-time code sent to your phone, or a fingerprint scan alongside a PIN. This layered approach helps protect against unauthorized access. Next, MFA works by combining factors across 3 categories: something you know, like a password; something you have, like a security token or phone; and something you are, like a fingerprint or facial recognition. Using 2 of these categories makes it much harder for attackers to break in. Now, the statement that MFA isn't needed if a strong password policy is enforced is false. Even strong passwords can be guessed, reused, or stolen. MFA adds an extra layer of protection by requiring something beyond just the password. Lastly, Microsoft Entra MFA supports several verification options to suit different needs and user preferences. These include phone calls, text messages, mobile app push notifications, and app-generated passcodes, offering flexibility and enhanced security. So in short, MFA is a critical defense that strengthens access control far beyond just relying on passwords. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Microsoft Entra ID can be synchronized with on-premises Active Directory using Microsoft Entra Connect. True. Microsoft Entra Connect only synchronizes user accounts but does not allow password synchronization. When on-premises Active Directory is connected to Microsoft Entra ID, users can use the same credentials for both environments. True, Microsoft Entra Connect enables two-way synchronization, allowing changes made in Microsoft Entra ID to sync back to on-premises AD. False. Let's now walk through the explanation for each of these answers. Microsoft Entra ID can be synchronized with on-premises Active Directory using Microsoft Entra Connect. This tool allows organizations to bridge their on-prem environment with the cloud, providing users with a consistent identity, whether they're logging into local resources or cloud services like Microsoft 365. The idea that Microsoft Entra Connect only synchronizes user accounts but not passwords is incorrect. Entra Connect supports password hash synchronization, meaning users can use the same password for both cloud and on-premises sign-ins. This simplifies access while maintaining security. When on-premises Active Directory is connected to Microsoft Entra ID, users indeed can use the same credentials for both environments. This unified experience reduces confusion and support calls, especially in hybrid environments where users access resources across both domains. However, Microsoft Entra Connect does not enable two-way synchronization. It supports only one-way sync from on-premises Active Directory to Microsoft Entra ID. Changes made in the cloud directory do not flow back to the on-premises AD, so administrators must manage changes carefully. So, to sum it up, Entra Connect simplifies hybrid identity management, but it's important to understand its limitations around synchronization direction. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Microsoft Defender for Cloud automatically blocks all cyber threats without the need for user intervention. False. Defender for Cloud provides security recommendations to improve an organization's overall security posture. True. Defender for Cloud uses security alerts to notify administrators about potential cyber threats. True, Microsoft Defender for Cloud does not support security monitoring for Amazon Web Services, AWS workloads. False. Now let's take a moment to explain each of these clearly. Microsoft Defender for Cloud does not automatically block all cyber threats. Instead, it detects and raises alerts when it identifies potential risks. Organizations can then configure automated responses, but human oversight or predefined policies are still needed for actual threat mitigation. Defender for Cloud does provide security recommendations. These suggestions are based on standards like the Azure Security Benchmark and help organizations align with best practices to strengthen their cloud security posture. Next, Defender for Cloud uses security alerts to keep administrators informed about suspicious activity. These alerts allow IT teams to investigate incidents quickly and take the necessary steps to prevent escalation. Finally, it is incorrect to say that Microsoft Defender for Cloud does not support security monitoring for AWS workloads. Defender for Cloud actually extends its monitoring capabilities to both AWS and Google Cloud, offering a unified view of security across multi-cloud environments. So overall, while Defender for Cloud doesn't block threats automatically, it plays a vital role in detection, recommendations, and cross-platform security monitoring. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Azure Files supports both SMB, server message block, and NFS, network file system protocols. True. Azure Files requires users to manage their own hardware and operating system. False. Azure File shares can be mounted by both cloud and on-premises deployments. True, Azure Files cannot be used as a direct replacement for on-premises file shares. False. Let's now go through the explanation for each of these. Azure Files supports both SMB and NFS protocols, which means it's compatible with Windows, Linux, and macOS clients. This flexibility allows organizations to use the same file sharing technology they're familiar with, just hosted in the cloud. Azure Files does not require users to manage hardware or the operating system. It's a fully managed service, meaning Microsoft takes care of all the back-end infrastructure. Users simply provision the file share and start using it. No server maintenance needed. Azure file shares can be mounted by both cloud-based services and on-premises servers. This makes it easy to integrate with existing environments and transition workloads to the cloud while keeping local systems in sync. Finally, the idea that Azure Files cannot be used as a direct replacement for on-premises file shares is incorrect. In fact, Azure Files is designed to serve as a seamless alternative, supporting the same SMB and NFS protocols commonly used in enterprise data centers. So overall, Azure Files offers a simple, compatible, and cloud-native solution for modern file sharing needs. A company has messages from a variety of sources, many Azure services, that need to be relayed to an application. Which Azure service would be best suited to this task? Select one answer. The correct answer is Azure Event Grid. Now let's explain why Azure Event Grid is the best fit for this scenario. Azure Event Grid is specifically built to handle event routing at scale. It allows you to connect multiple Azure services like blob storage, resource groups, and even custom apps, and route those events to destinations such as Azure Functions, Logic Apps, or other services. This makes it ideal when you're dealing with many sources generating events that need to be delivered and acted upon in near real time. Azure Functions, on the other hand, is designed to run code in response to events, but it doesn't manage event routing across sources. It acts more like the destination, not the router. Azure IoT Hub is focused on IoT scenarios, such as managing communication between IoT devices and the cloud. Since the question is about general Azure services and not IoT devices, it doesn't apply here. Azure Service Bus is a powerful messaging service for connecting distributed applications, but it's more suited for message queuing and command processing rather than routing events from many Azure services. So, in short, Azure Event Grid is the most efficient solution for routing events from many Azure sources to the right destination. Contoso Construction, Inc. plans to migrate its services to the cloud, but requires a private on-premises network securely connected to the public cloud. Which 3 Microsoft Azure services enable a secure hybrid cloud model with the necessary security features? Select 3 answers. The correct answers are virtual networks, ExpressRoute, hybrid connections. Now, let's walk through the explanation for each of these. Virtual networks allow you to securely connect and isolate resources within Azure. They form the foundation for secure communication between Azure-based services and on-premises systems, much like your traditional network, just in the cloud. ExpressRoute takes it a step further by providing private connectivity between your on-premises infrastructure and Azure. Unlike typical VPNs over the public internet, ExpressRoute connections don't go through the public web, which means more consistent performance and enhanced security. Great for businesses with strict compliance needs. Hybrid connections enable secure communication between Azure services and on-premises applications, especially in scenarios where full networking integration isn't necessary. It's lightweight and commonly used for app services that need to access on-prem resources behind a firewall. Now, custom connectors are not part of this solution. They are used to integrate with third-party APIs or services, especially in Power Platform or Logic apps, not for setting up secure hybrid cloud networks. So overall, to securely bridge your on-premises and cloud environments, you'll want to leverage virtual networks, ExpressRoute, and hybrid connections. Arrange the steps for registering a device in Microsoft Entra ID to enforce conditional access policies. 1. Enable device registration in the organization. 2. Register the device using Microsoft Entra ID. 3. Manage devices using Microsoft Intune. 4. Apply device-based conditional access policies. Let's now go over why this order makes sense. The first step is to enable device registration in the organization. This allows Microsoft Entra ID to recognize devices that belong to users and ensures they can later be managed and secured. Without this setting enabled, devices can't be registered at all. Next, you register the device using Microsoft Entra ID. This links the device to the user's identity in Azure AD, allowing the system to track and authenticate it. It also helps establish a unique identity for the device, which is key to managing it securely. After registration, you manage devices using Microsoft Intune. This is where IT admins can push configurations, enforce compliance policies, and monitor the status of each device. Intune helps ensure the device remains secure and aligned with organizational standards. Finally, you apply device-based conditional access policies. These policies restrict access to apps and data unless the device meets certain conditions, like being compliant or managed. This ensures only trusted and secure devices can access sensitive resources. So the sequence follows a logical flow, from enabling device recognition to linking it to the directory, managing it, and finally enforcing security access rules. A startup is building a platform for streaming fitness videos. They want a scalable hosting solution that requires minimal infrastructure management. The solution should support APIs for user authentication and a mobile app backend to handle user data and send notifications. Which Azure hosting options should they consider? 2 answers. The correct answers are Azure App Service for web apps and API apps, Azure App Service for mobile apps. Let's now walk through why these 2 services are the best fit. Azure App Service for web apps and API apps is designed to simplify deployment and scale for web-based platforms. It allows startups to quickly host websites and expose back-end APIs without worrying about managing servers. This makes it ideal for use cases like user authentication or streaming APIs where you want rapid development and minimal maintenance. Azure App Service for mobile apps complements that by handling mobile back-end needs. It supports user authentication, push notifications, and data sync, making it perfect for fitness apps that need to store user data, send updates, or engage users through notifications, all without building those features from scratch. Virtual machines with custom configurations, on the other hand, demand a lot of setup and ongoing maintenance. That's not ideal for a startup focused on agility. And containers with manual scaling introduce operational complexity. You'd need to manage scaling rules and infrastructure, which slows down development and distracts from your core product. So, to stay lean and move fast, the app service offerings for web and mobile apps are the smartest and most scalable choice. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. By default, Azure VPN gateways are deployed in an active standby configuration. True. An active-active VPN configuration assigns 2 public IP addresses and supports dual tunnels. VPN failover to ExpressRoute is an unsupported scenario in Azure. False, zone-redundant VPN gateways improve resilience by placing gateway instances in different Azure availability zones. True. Now let's break down each of these points for clarity. Azure VPN gateways are deployed in an active standby setup by default. This means there's one active gateway handling traffic while a standby instance is waiting to take over if the primary one fails. This setup enhances fault tolerance with minimal downtime. An active VPN configuration does allow for greater redundancy and throughput. It uses 2 public IP addresses and supports dual tunnels while enabling simultaneous connections and load balancing, which is useful for high availability scenarios. The idea that VPN failover to ExpressRoute is not supported is actually false. Azure supports using VPN gateways as a failover path for ExpressRoute. This means if ExpressRoute goes down, the VPN can step in as a backup to maintain connectivity, which adds another layer of resilience. Lastly, zone-redundant VPN gateways significantly boost availability by distributing the gateway instances across different Azure availability zones. If one zone experiences an outage, the gateway in another zone can continue to handle traffic without disruption. So, in summary, Azure VPN gateways are designed for high availability and disaster recovery, with flexible configurations to suit enterprise needs. Which Azure networking feature allows two virtual networks to connect directly to each other and communicate over the Microsoft Backbone network? Select one answer. The correct answer is virtual network peering. Let's now dive into why this is the right choice. Virtual network peering enables two Azure virtual networks to connect to each other directly and privately using Microsoft's internal backbone network. This provides low latency, high throughput, and secure communication without sending traffic over the public internet. It's ideal when you want multiple virtual networks, possibly across regions or subscriptions, to behave like one seamless network. Azure ExpressRoute, while it also provides private connectivity, is designed for connecting on-premises infrastructure to Azure, not for connecting two virtual networks within Azure. Network security groups are used to control traffic to and from resources within a virtual network. They don't create connectivity between networks, they just regulate it within the same one. Point-to-site VPN is for remote users who need secure access to a virtual network. It connects devices, not entire virtual networks, to each other. So, for direct and private communication between two virtual networks, virtual network peering is your go-to solution. Which of the following services can Microsoft Defender for Cloud monitor and protect in addition to Azure services? Select one answer. The correct answer is all of the above. Let's walk through why that is. Microsoft Defender for Cloud is a cross-platform security solution, and it's not limited to just Azure. It can also monitor and secure environments hosted in Amazon Web Services, AWS, Google Cloud Platform, GCP, and even on-premises data centers. This makes it extremely valuable for organizations that operate in hybrid or multi-cloud setups. For instance, if a business has part of its infrastructure running on Azure and other parts on AWS or in its own data center, Defender for Cloud provides a unified security view. That means admins don't need to switch between tools. They get visibility, threat detection, and recommendations all in one place. So, whether your workloads are fully in the cloud, spread across providers, or still partially on premises, Microsoft Defender for Cloud ensures they're covered. That's why the correct answer is all of the above. You are tasked with granting temporary access to a new engineer who will be working on a specific virtual machine for a week. What is the best way to handle this using RBAC? The correct answer is assign the engineer the contributor role at the virtual machine level. Now let's take a moment to explain why this is the best option. The contributor role at the virtual machine level allows the engineer to perform all necessary management actions on that VM, like starting, stopping, or configuring it, without giving them access to other unrelated resources. This aligns perfectly with the principle of least privilege, which says you should give just enough access to get the job done. No more, no less. On the other hand, assigning the owner role at the subscription level gives too much power. It lets the engineer manage everything in that subscription, which is excessive for a temporary task focused on one VM. Similarly, assigning the reader role at the subscription level won't work either because it only grants view access. The engineer wouldn't be able to actually manage the VM. And if you assign the contributor role at the management group level, that would give broad access across many resources and subscriptions. That's too much exposure for a temporary task. So, to stay secure and efficient, assigning the contributor role directly to the virtual machine is the right move. Which two key considerations must be made when deploying a virtual machine to an Azure virtual network? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. The VM must be deployed in the same region as the VNET. The VM must be assigned to an existing subnet within the VNET. Now let's explain. To start, a virtual machine must be in the same region as its virtual network. This is because Azure virtual networks are region-bound, meaning you cannot link a VM in one region to a VNET in another. For example, a VM deployed in West Europe cannot connect to a VNET in East US. Keeping them in the same region ensures smooth network communication. Additionally, every virtual machine must be placed inside a subnet within the VNET. This subnet provides the IP addressing and network settings the VM needs to function. Without this, the VM cannot join the network properly. On the other hand, It's not mandatory to have two subnets for redundancy. A VM can function perfectly within a single subnet. Likewise, virtual networks cannot span multiple regions, so that option doesn't apply to Azure's architecture. So the two things to always check are regional alignment and subnet assignment. That's the foundation for any successful VM deployment in Azure. Your company is developing an order processing system where incoming customer orders need to be temporarily stored before being processed. You want to ensure that the system is loosely coupled, allowing the order processing service to handle requests as capacity allows. Which solution should you implement? Select one answer: Azure Queue Storage. Let's go ahead and explain why that's the correct choice. Azure Queue Storage is designed exactly for this kind of scenario. It enables asynchronous message queuing, which means one service can send messages, in this case, customer orders, and another service can pick them up later for processing. This keeps the two parts of the system loosely coupled, which is ideal for scaling and fault tolerance. Now, Azure Table Storage is great for storing structured NoSQL data, but it's not intended for message handling. Similarly, Azure SQL Database is a powerful relational database, but it's not optimized for asynchronous queuing and would add unnecessary overhead here. Azure Blob Storage, on the other hand, is meant for storing unstructured data like images or files, not queues of order messages. So in a system that needs to store and process orders flexibly, Azure Queue Storage is the most efficient and purpose-built option. For each security concept listed below the table, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its description in the option column. The unique identifier for a person, object, or service in a digital system is identification. The process of proving that an identity is valid and genuine is authentication. The process of determining what an identity is allowed to do is authorization. Examples include a passport, a driver's license, or an Azure AD user account. This is identification. Examples include entering a password or using an SSH key. This falls under authentication. Examples include event tickets, key cards, and shared access signatures, SaaS. That's authorization. Now let's take a moment to explain why each match is the correct fit. Let's start with identification. This concept is all about answering the question, who are you? In a security context, this is your digital fingerprint, your name tag in a system. Real-world examples include passports and Azure Active Directory user accounts, both of which uniquely identify an individual or service. Next, authentication is the step where we prove we are who we claim to be. Think of it like showing your ID card to enter a secure building. Whether it's entering a password or providing an SSH key, the goal here is to validate your identity using something you know or have. Moving on to authorization, this answers the question, now that we know who you are, what can you do? This step grants access based on verified identity. Just like a concert ticket allows access to certain seats or areas, or a SaaS token limits what you can do with Azure storage, authorization ensures actions are permitted based on your role or credentials. Altogether, these three work in a sequence. Identification tells the system who's there, authentication proves they're legitimate, and authorization decides what they're allowed to do. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Microsoft Cost Management allows users to create budgets to monitor spending. True. The TCO calculator is used to estimate Azure costs, while the pricing calculator compares on-premises versus cloud costs. False. Azure tags can help track and allocate costs across departments. True. Azure Marketplace only includes free solutions, and all services listed are Microsoft-owned. False. Now let's walk through why each statement is true or false. Microsoft Cost Management is a budgeting tool that lets users create budgets, monitor cloud usage, and set alerts when spending approaches defined thresholds. This supports proactive cost control. The TCO calculator is actually used to compare the cost of running workloads on-premises versus in Azure. It doesn't estimate Azure service costs. That's the role of the Azure pricing calculator. So this statement is incorrect because it flips their actual functions. Azure tags are labels you assign to resources to track things like departments, environments, or projects. These tags make it easier to group and report costs, especially in larger organizations. Finally, Azure Marketplace contains both free and paid solutions, and many of the offerings come from third-party providers, not just Microsoft. So the idea that it only includes free and Microsoft-owned solutions is false. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Azure Service Health monitors only global Azure services and does not track the status of an organization's specific resources. False. Azure Service Health includes Azure Status, Service Health, and Resource Health to provide a complete view of system health. True Resource Health provides personalized health status updates for an organization's deployed resources. True users can configure alerts in Service Health to receive notifications about planned maintenance or outages. True. Now, let's break these down and understand why they are correct or incorrect. To begin with, the first statement is false because Azure Service Health goes beyond just global monitoring. It provides insights into both global service issues and the specific health of your own Azure resources. That means it can tell you not just if Azure itself is having problems, but also if your deployed services are affected. Moving on, the second statement is absolutely true. Azure Service Health is made up of three parts: Azure Status, which covers global issues; Service Health, which looks at services your organization relies on; and Resource Health, which zooms in on individual resources like virtual machines or databases. Next, the third statement is also true. Resource Health plays a key role in helping administrators know if specific resources are healthy or encountering problems. This allows for quicker troubleshooting and decision-making when something isn't working right. Finally, the fourth statement is true as well. You can set up alerts in Azure Service Health so that you're notified by email or other channels when there's planned maintenance, unexpected service disruption, or any updates. This is especially helpful for staying ahead of downtime and managing communication with your team. So together, these statements help paint a full picture of how Azure Service Health keeps you informed both globally and locally within your cloud environment. For each Azure alert type listed below the table, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its trigger condition in the option column. Triggers when department spending reaches a specified quota, department alert, can be set to notify if monthly costs exceed a limit, budget alert. Tracks actual usage costs against a preset budget, budget alert, designed for monitoring departmental spending targets. Department spending quota alert helps prevent overspending within specific departments. Department spending quota alert notifies users when spending surpasses a budget threshold. Budget alert monitors usage at the department level, not global level. Department spending quota alert, useful for setting spending limits across the organization. Budget alert. Now let's explain. Department spending quota alerts are focused on departmental level control, which is why they are assigned to conditions like monitoring department spending targets and triggering when quotas are hit. These alerts help specific teams stay within their allocated budgets and avoid overspending. In contrast, budget alerts work across the entire organization. They notify stakeholders when spending surpasses a set limit and are useful for overall financial visibility. For example, if your entire company budget is $10,000 a month, a budget alert can be set to warn when you're approaching that. So both alert types serve different scopes, departmental versus organizational, but together they provide a full picture of Azure cost control. Fill in the blank by selecting the correct option from the drop-down menu. The Service Trust Portal is a Microsoft portal that provides access to compliance documents, security reports, and privacy information for Microsoft Cloud services. Now let's go ahead and explain. To begin with, the Service Trust Portal is specifically designed to give organizations access to the documents they need to assess Microsoft's cloud services from a compliance and data protection perspective. For example, if a company needs to review audit reports or understand how Microsoft protects customer data, this portal is the go-to source. On the other hand, the Azure Policy Service is often confused in name, but there's actually no such thing as an Azure Policy Portal. Azure Policy itself is used for enforcing organizational standards and compliance across Azure resources, but it's not a documentation hub. Additionally, the Microsoft Purview portal is focused on data governance. It helps with classifying and managing data across systems, but it doesn't provide compliance documentation or security reports. So, in a nutshell, when it comes to accessing compliance-related information directly from Microsoft, the Service Trust Portal is the accurate and intended choice. Select one answer. A company is using Azure resources in multiple regions and wants to ensure compliance with governance regulations. They need a way to tag resources based on their data classification levels. Which feature should they use? The correct answer is Azure Tags. Let me now explain why. To begin with, Azure Tags are used specifically for applying metadata to resources based on criteria like classification levels, department, environment, or cost center. These tags make it easier to organize, locate, and enforce policies across distributed resources. Now, Azure Monitor is designed for performance monitoring and telemetry, not classification. So, while it helps you understand how your applications are running, it doesn't help with labeling or enforcing governance. Next, Azure Policy helps enforce tagging rules or make sure resources comply with set policies, but it doesn't handle classification itself. You still need tags in place for Azure Policy to act upon. Finally, cost management is great for tracking and managing Azure spending, but it has no direct functionality tied to governance or data classification. In short, for tagging resources based on security levels or data types, especially when working across multiple regions, Azure Tags is the most effective solution. An organization wants to classify its sensitive data across hybrid and multi-cloud environments and ensure compliance with regulatory requirements. Which Microsoft tools can help achieve this? Select two answers. The correct answers are A. Microsoft Purview, D. Service Trust Portal. Now let's explain. To begin with, Microsoft Purview is a robust data governance solution that allows organizations to classify, label, and manage sensitive data across multiple environments, including on-premises, multi-cloud, and SaaS platforms. This makes it ideal for maintaining regulatory compliance in complex infrastructures. In addition, the Service Trust Portal provides essential resources like compliance reports, audit summaries, and implementation guides. These help organizations understand Microsoft's practices and meet external regulatory requirements. On the other hand, Azure Policy focuses on enforcing how resources are deployed, but does not handle data classification or governance. Similarly, resource locks are used to prevent accidental deletion of resources, but have nothing to do with compliance or data classification. Therefore, the right combination for this scenario is Microsoft Purview and the Service Trust Portal, which is not one of the recommendation categories for Azure Advisor. The correct answer is capacity. Now let me explain. Azure Advisor is a personalized cloud consultant that provides best practices and recommendations in specific focus areas. These categories include reliability, which helps ensure services remain available during failures, cost, which targets areas where expenses can be reduced, and security, which highlights ways to protect your environment from potential threats. However, capacity is not one of the built-in recommendation categories in Azure Advisor. Capacity management is typically addressed through Azure Monitor or other tools, but it's not a defined category under Azure Advisor's recommendation engine. Which of the following scenarios correctly describe authentication and authorization? Select two answers. A. Entering a PIN code to access an online banking account is an example of authentication. D. A keycard granting access to specific office rooms is an example of authorization. Let's walk through the explanation. Entering a PIN is a textbook case of authentication. The system needs to confirm the user is who they claim to be before granting access to their bank account. This is done through something they know, the PIN. Now, for authorization, once identity is confirmed, the system decides what the user can access. That's where the keycard comes in. It grants access to specific rooms based on permissions. That's a clear example of authorization. Meanwhile, an event ticket might feel like authentication, but it's really about access control. It says where and when you can go, not who you are. And a software license key is more about verifying a product purchase. It's entitlement, not identity verification. So once again, entering a PIN is authentication, and using a key card to access a room is authorization. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Azure Monitor collects and stores log data but does not provide visualization tools. False Application Insights allows users to monitor real-time application performance and detect issues before they impact users. True Azure Monitor alerts allow administrators to define thresholds for performance metrics and trigger actions when exceeded. True Service Health alerts provide notifications about global Azure outages but do not track planned maintenance. False. Let's break it down together. The first statement is false because Azure Monitor actually provides a range of visualization tools. You can use features like log analytics, Kusto queries, and dashboards in Power BI to visualize and analyze the data it collects. The second one is true. Application Insights is built exactly for that purpose. It offers telemetry for web apps, helping teams catch latency and performance issues before they affect users. For example, it can show you when response times are increasing due to backend delays. Next, Azure Monitor alerts truly allow admins to set thresholds. When performance metrics like CPU or memory go beyond those thresholds, alerts are triggered automatically. This helps you act before things break. Finally, Service Health alerts are not just about global outages. That statement is false because Service Health also includes planned maintenance and region-specific events, helping you stay ahead of disruptions. So understanding how these monitoring and alerting tools differ is key for proactive cloud management. You need to create a custom solution that uses thresholds to trigger auto-scaling functionality to scale an app up or down to meet user demand. The correct answer is Azure Monitor. Now let's explain why that's the right choice. Azure Monitor collects performance metrics such as CPU usage, memory consumption, and more. These metrics can be used to define thresholds for when auto-scaling should occur. For example, if CPU usage exceeds 70%, Azure Monitor can trigger an auto-scale rule to add more instances automatically. This makes it an ideal tool for creating dynamic and responsive cloud environments. In contrast, Application Insights focuses more on application performance monitoring and diagnostics, not auto-scaling. Azure Advisor gives optimization recommendations but doesn't handle threshold-based scaling. And Azure Service Health provides alerts about service issues or maintenance, but does not manage or trigger auto-scaling. So, in short, Azure Monitor is the best fit when you need to respond to system load changes using defined metrics and thresholds.